Well, I think if we um, encountered the Hebrew prophets today, we would probably think they were artists of some kind. We would think that they were performance artists, sort of standing in public and wailing naked. That would be a very artful thing to do these days. Gathering a crowd and just smashing pots together, um, tying yourself up and laying down on the floor for days and weeks and months. And then writing reams and reams of poetry, very bizarre and artful poetry. You know, people of language, and then of course music is also a part of how the Hebrew prophets kind of did their thing. So I think we would probably, if we encountered them today, think of them in the vein of artists of one kind or another. But of course, because it's all locked up in a holy book, it's within the realm of religion. We think of them as holy men and holy women. I'm not really interested in defining what art is and who's an artist and who isn't an artist and that kind of thing. I think this term is always in flux, from one time to another, from one person to another. I think maybe the important question in the present is looking at the artists among us and beginning to ask ourselves whether we're in the presence of prophets, whether the creative people around us are there to amuse us or make life more beautiful, or put nicer things on the wall to make life more bearable, help us cope with life, or whether these are people giving us an integral awareness of the present, helping us to be very much in the realities of the present, whether they're beautiful or painful. People who are envisioning possible routes into new futures, or people who are giving us the tools to enable us to let go of dying pasts. I think those are the sort of questions I'm interested in seeing with. Well, I'm a musician, and I kind of think it's simplest not to concern myself with titles that might come and go, or labels that might come or go. I suppose I'm motivated to make work that enables us to gather around the realities of the present and the pain of the present. And to make work that enables a deeper level of engagement in reality for whoever is there to encounter it. Yeah, I don't want to call myself a prophet. Other people might call me that from time to time, and then other people might say he absolutely is not. But I think it's best just to concern myself with making what I'm making. So Jesus lived in a time of absolute social and political crisis, and the New Testament, as a collection of texts, just spans the before, during, and after, and a total catastrophe, the collapse of a people's way of life and faith and belief and understanding of who they were in the world and how it worked. And it's times like that, I think, that artists and prophets really intersect. And I think Jesus was, among many other things, a prophet and an artist who was creating work that enabled people to come to terms with an ending, a collapse, a tragedy, a huge death event. Actually, 70 AD. It was a horrible, horrible thing. But also it helps people envision ways forward into alternative futures. So yeah, I think Jesus was a prophet. I think Jesus was an artist. Art must always do what it's there to do. It must be absolutely free to do so. So the commandeering of art for the purposes of the church, or the purposes of an endeavour or a process that we might describe by the word mission, becomes problematic for me. But the reality is, art is so often missional. It is so often, well, Marshall McLuhan used a beautiful phrase. He said that artists are people who build Noah's arks into new futures. And in that sense, the artist is a missional person creating work that kind of rescues people from a collapsing present into a renewed future. I think if there is a missional kind of description of art, I think McLuhan put it quite beautifully. Well, we live in a world of endings. We live in a world of tragedy and collapse and loss. We all encounter it on some level, and sometimes we encounter it together collectively. We encounter loss, death, endings. As a human species, we're moving into a time where scientists are ringing the bell and saying we've entered a time of mass extinction. We have done. Animal species are being extinct every day, in the hundreds actually. And it is, as beings that walk in the image of God, the life is sacred, and when it's lost, it's a human function to lament, to grieve, to spend time in unhappiness, and I think artists often host that. So I made a record of lament. I think a lot of people would say most of my records are a bit lamenting. Well, I think we can't move into newness until we grieve the end of what you've lost. And the failure to move into the future tends to come of trying to hold on to a past that's slipped away, which so much of the world is desperately trying to do at the moment. You see that in our, in the sort of political swing of the West. So yeah, lamenting is about moving onwards. You can't turn around and move forwards until you've looked back and grieved what you're losing. So the song Prayer Answered with Crosses by John Newton is less well known than Amazing Grace, because it doesn't really have a happy ending. It speaks of failure and suffering, and I guess it's the prayer of a person encountering that and coming to terms with growing through pain. So it's much less victorious. Sounds a lot less like a national anthem. I've no idea what kind of tune he would have put it to. I made up a tune of my own. But there we go. I think maybe in Christian circles we're not that good at talking about failure and collapse and grief and sharing that. So there's John Newton's other song, apart from Amazing Grace. It's worth listening to. No one really has the nerve to say to me that they're not creative, and I think it's because I sort of am. So, and they don't want to be rude. So people will probably say, "Oh, you're very creative." The thing comes that way around, and I guess I always think, well, we're all creative, and we all interact with creativity. To be human is to be creative, and I think maybe it's a shame that we pigeonhole ourselves and each other as creative or not creative. We're all interacting with beauty, and we're all interacting with grief and aesthetics. This is the language of how we do these things. We all cry, we all laugh, and I think creativity almost starts from those kinds of places.